All right, let's talk about something that keeps engineers up at night. What happens when our systems break? We pour everything into building things that are solid and reliable. But here's the hard truth. Failure isn't a question of if, it's a question of when.
So I'm going to ask you, point blank, what's your plan? What happens when your app, your database, maybe your entire data center just goes dark? It's a tough question, for sure, but having a good answer is what makes the difference between a tiny little hiccup and a full-blown catastrophe.
You know, in the world of these complex, spread-out systems, failure is baked into the recipe. It's not a possibility, it's a guarantee. Hardware gives out, someone cuts a fiber optic cable, heck, whole regions can get knocked offline. So the real job isn't trying to stop every single failure. That's impossible. It's about building a system that can take a punch and keep on going.
Okay, so let's start at level 1, the foundation of it all. This is about building a fortress, but all within a single geographic region. This is pretty much the starting point for any serious application you're putting out into the world.
So what does that actually mean? Well, it means you're not just running your stuff on one computer in one building. Cloud providers like GCP set up their regions with these multiple isolated availability zones. The best way to think about them is as separate data centers, miles apart, with their own power, their own cooling, their own networks. So if one of those zones goes down, your app doesn't even blink. It just keeps running in the other ones.
And honestly, this approach is the sweet spot for a ton of applications. I mean, you get really solid protection against the most common kinds of failures, like a construction crew taking out power to one building. At the same time, your users nearby get super fast response times, and, behind the scenes, managing your data is way simpler and cheaper. It's a fantastic starting point.
But, and this is the big but, here's the pivot point. A single region fortress is strong, yeah, but it still has one massive single point of failure, the region itself. Think about a massive earthquake, a huge power grid failure, or some major network meltdown that takes down all the zones at once. What do you do then?
And that question brings us to level 2. This is where we stop thinking about a local fortress and start becoming a continent hopper. We're designing a system that's built to survive a complete regional blackout.
This little chart just lays out the upgrade perfectly. With a single region, you survive a zone failure. But with multi-region, you can survive a regional failure. That's a huge leap. And look at the user side of things. We go from giving great low-latency service to people nearby to giving that same great experience to users all over the globe.
So when do you actually pull the trigger and go for this more complicated setup? Well, it really comes down to some pretty strict business needs. If your service absolutely positively cannot go down, we're talking banking, critical infrastructure, then you need multi-region. Or if you have to deal with data laws like GDPR, which say European user data has to stay in Europe, well, you're going to need a region there. And of course, if you have users everywhere, this is how you make sure the experience doesn't stink for someone halfway around the world.
But what if? What if even that isn't enough? What if you need a plan for the truly unthinkable? Your entire cloud provider has a massive, catastrophic failure. Well, that brings us to the final, most complex level of them all, the global shield.
This is it, the absolute peak of resilience architecture. We are talking about distributing your services across completely different companies, like running on GCP and another major cloud provider. This is basically your insurance policy against a disaster that affects every single region of your primary platform. It's incredibly rare for sure, but for some systems, it's a risk you just can't take.
Let's make this real. Imagine your main service, say payment processing, is running live on GCP. For every single transaction, the critical data is also being copied over in real time to a database on a totally different cloud provider. Over on that second cloud, you have what's called a pilot light running. It's a tiny, minimal version of your service just sitting there, ready to go. If, and it's a big if, GCP were to have some kind of global meltdown, an automated system would instantly fire up the full service on the other cloud and reroute all the traffic. You'd be talking about minutes of downtime instead of hours or even days.
Now, this all sounds pretty amazing, right? But this is where we have to face the final boss battle of system design, the complexity trade-off. Because every single one of these levels of resilience, it comes with a price tag.
And that's the absolute key takeaway here. Resilience isn't some switch you just flip on. It's a ladder. And every time you climb a rung, from single region to multi-cloud, you are making a deliberate choice to take on a whole new set of challenges.
So what do these challenges actually look like? Well, for starters, your tech just gets way harder to manage. You're juggling different tools, different APIs. Trying to keep data perfectly synchronized across continents, or even across two different cloud companies, is one of the hardest problems in computer science. Your team is going to need more people with more specialized skills just to keep the lights on. And yeah, of course, your bill is going to be significantly higher.
Okay, so with all of that on the table, how in the world do you choose? What's the right move for you? Let's look at a simple way to think about it, a little strategy guide to help you decide.
This decision framework really puts it all into perspective. Look, if what you need is just standard high availability, maybe you run a local e-commerce site, a really well-designed single-region setup is going to be perfect. But if you're a national bank and you have to survive a regional disaster, or you're dealing with data loss, then multi-region is your answer. And if you're running something like a global payment system where even a minute of downtime is a catastrophe, well, you have to be seriously looking at the multi-cloud playbook.
And that really brings us to the one question you have to ask yourself at the end of the day. And for a second, just forget all the technology, all the architecture diagrams, just focus on the business. How much downtime, in minutes, in hours, per year, can your service truly afford? Because your answer to that one single question, that will tell you exactly what level of resilience you need to go out and build.